Hello and welcome into episode 3 of Snakes Territory. I'm your host, Jesse Friedman. I am not joined by Jack Summers today. Jack is at a wedding in New Orleans, and we figured we'd give him the day off. I do have a special guest joining me, though. It's Nick Piecoro of the Arizona Republic. Nick has been on the D-backs beat for a long time. He's a good friend of mine. I'm very excited for you to hear from him, but I will confess on the front end that I had a bit of an audio mishap where my nice microphone was not actually used during the interview. Instead, my mic was just these AirPods, which, if you don't know, AirPods microphone, not great. So anyway, apologies for that on the front end. The good news in a show like this is that really Nick is the star of the show. He's the one that you all came to hear from. So without further ado, let's jump into that interview. Well, here in this third edition of Snakes Territory, we are very excited to be joined by the one and only Nick Piecoro from the Arizona Republic. Nick, I know we've spent a lot of time together the last few years in the Diamondbacks press box and covering a whole lot of baseball games here the last few years. It's fun to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me on, Jesse. Good to be here.
How was New York?
It was bizarre. It was freezing cold one of the days, and then as we were writing our stories in the press box after the last game, it was almost hot enough to be sweating. So I guess that's what it's like to live in a place where there's actual weather.
That is very fair. I guess most of the world is sort of like that around this time of year. Yeah, well, jumping straight in here to some Diamondback storylines, Nick. Obviously, the biggest news here the last 24 hours is the fact that Ketel Marte is hurt. Happened early on in the game against the Washington Nationals on Friday. He pulled a hamstring. At least to my knowledge, we don't have any definitive word on what his timeline would look like or anything like that. But we do know that he is heading to the injured list. And obviously this comes on the heels of the Diamondbacks signing Ketel to a long-term extension. So it's interesting how the timing can work out on these things. I guess my first question to you on this, Nick, is that it sounds like, according to your guys' reporting at the Arizona Republic, that the Diamondbacks are bringing in Tim Tawa to take Ketel's spot on the roster. Tim Tawa, someone who some D-backs fans may be familiar with, some not. A guy who's really kind of developed as a utility player, has covered a variety of positions, put up some pretty big offensive numbers in the upper levels of the minors. Although, granted, it is Reno and Amarillo. We always have to factor those things in. But why do you think the Diamondbacks are going with Tim Tawa as opposed to the name that a lot of people have in their heads right now? That, of course, being Jordan Lawlar.
I don't know. I guess I'm kind of flying a little bit blind here myself. I would guess, though, that it's a matter of it's probably a couple of things together. First, that Tawa has dominated in AAA pretty much for the last calendar year, off to a nice start down there right now. I think the first part of it is the focus on him. He played great in spring training. He was a guy that I heard some questions about his defense as he came up through the minor leagues, kind of unsure about what position is really going to be his best. But then saw him play, maybe a couple weeks in a row or so during his time at big league camp, and came away with absolutely no question that this guy can play a big league caliber second base. I don't know that he's going to do it, day in and day out consistently at that level, but I think we all saw someone that has all the ability, in every way necessary to play an above average second base, or at least an average second base. And then I guess as it pertains to Lawlar, I would guess it's more about wanting him to get grounded and get everyday at bats and on a consistent basis down there. I also wonder, he just hasn't had a lot of experience at second base. It's been mostly shortstop with a little bit of third sprinkled in. The thinking was that, moving over to second base isn't going to be that big of a deal. And I think that certainly is true, but also he just hasn't done it yet. I don't know if they felt like it was fair to bring him up and push him over to a position that he's only played for, a week or so, and expect him to do it at a high level. I think that there is a hope that the next time that Jordan Lawlar is called to the big leagues will be, for good. I think they want to be sure that he's ready and able, and not putting him in kind of, I don't know. This is all just me speculating. It'd be a tough spot to be putting him into, throwing him into, when I don't know if you have it in front of you. I could bring it up here as we talk, but like I don't think that he's played more than 3 or 4 games in at second base in his professional career. Three is the number, so
Hmm.
I'd be asking a lot.
Yeah, it makes sense. And it seems like, as you said earlier, like the Diamondbacks really prioritize wanting the next time they bring up Jordan Lawlar to the majors to be the time that he stays, and you can kind of understand them being deliberate with when they fire that bullet, and trying to make it, trying to position him for success as well as they possibly can. I guess the other side of this, Nick, is that Ketel Marte is a pretty big part of this baseball team. The Diamondbacks will be without him for an undetermined amount of time. We certainly don't expect him to miss, a super long time. You're not looking at the All-Star break or something like that, hopefully with a hamstring. But we have seen injuries like this kind of linger in the past. Alec Thomas, of course, last season had some issues with the hamstring that just continued to pop up throughout the season. So certainly isn't great news. I want to jump into the extension that the team signed with Ketel, though. 6 years, $116.5 million. I know you reported the full breakdown of all the numbers and everything. My first reaction to this, Nick, was that it was a little bit. I mean, it's hard to be upset about a team extending their best player, right? Like
Yeah.
Ketel Marte is a very, very good baseball player, but at the same time, the Diamondbacks already had club control through 2028. So it wasn't like they needed to do something like this. They already had him under control through his age 34 season. And you could argue that, after his age 34 season, like, there's some risk there. Like, you don't know what the years after that are going to look like for Ketel. So I know you've done a lot of reporting on this. What is kind of your perspective on how the Diamondbacks weighed all of those factors in this decision?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like they're not too concerned about what he's going to look like positionally going forward. That wherever he plays, he's going to hit. And you look at the fact that he has a really good approach, that he has tremendous athleticism and bat speed and power. He doesn't really swing and miss very much, certainly in the zone. It's a guy that has kind of all the components of someone that would probably age well as a hitter.
Hmm.
But you start getting into the mid to late 30s, you're talking about a time when guys can have trouble staying on the field. And obviously this was done before this hamstring injury, but like it is an example of a guy who I mean, look, it's been a guy that's had trouble staying on the field for stretches of his career to begin with. So, yeah,
Right.
I think there's risk there. I think 46 million out of the 116.5 is deferred. So that certainly makes it more appealing from the team's perspective. And then I think he was pushing back a little bit of the money um, over the next couple of years. So he's creating a little bit of flexibility for these guys in terms of putting their team together this year and next year. Um, I don't know. I wondered if not getting the Montgomery deal done. Uh, maybe there was an anticipation that at some point this year, Jordan Montgomery was going to pitch well. At some point, we were going to trade him and save, 5, 8, 10, 12 million, whatever it might have been.
Right.
And when that didn't happen, and they realized, oh wow, okay, we're really on the hook for all of this. Did it create a little bit of urgency to not urgency, but like maybe a little bit more willingness to want to do this kind of deal to put themselves in a little bit more of a comfortable financial space? I don't know. Um, yeah, I agree though. I mean, I think I thought it was a little bit surprising that they would go that far out. But I do think Catel's like a really good hitter, and you start looking at what he probably should be making at this point in time. You're
Right.
still looking at a very team friendly contract for a player of his ability. Maybe they felt a little bit of like let's do him right here. Let's get him a little bit more in line with where he ought to be.
Hmm.
Um, and again, like I don't think you're entering like bad contract territory at all with him, right?
No.
I mean, it's still a pretty fair deal. I haven't done all the math in terms of what he's going to end up making from the Diamondbacks over all of these contracts, but um, yeah, I mean, he's
Way less than he probably should.
but well paid, yeah, but well paid,
Yeah,
and it puts him in position to kind of finish his career here, and if he already was, but certainly in position to be among the greatest Diamondbacks players in franchise history, which is pretty cool. Something he wanted. He wants to be here long term. They want him. So it kind of makes sense, I feel like, on a number of levels. But I do generally agree with your I don't know if confusion, but like a surprise on their willingness to go
sure.
into this part of his career at a time when there just didn't seem to be any real need to with so many years left to go on the previous deal.
You've done a lot of reporting on Ketel Marte over the years, right? You've been on the Diamondbacks beat since long before his tenure here started. Me just being on the beat here, the last few years, I've gotten a little bit of sense of who he is as a person and his personality. There was a quote in your story that really stood out to me. You wrote that Ketel Marte is comfortable and he does not seem like the type of player who finds comfort easily, making this situation all the more valuable to him. I think, Nick, you probably know Ketel Marte, the person, as well or probably better than any reporter on planet Earth. What do you mean when you talk about how he's not the type of player who finds comfort easily, but it seems like he's found that in Arizona?
Yeah, I don't think he's just this natural outgoing personality that can just kind of land in a group of guys and immediately be at home with them and comfortable with them.
Mm,
Um, I think that he's the kind of guy that, like, the idea of going somewhere new and trying to get settled might be difficult. I don't know that for sure. But I do know that when he signed his previous two extensions, he admitted to having put a lot of pressure on himself to live up to them both times in the immediate aftermath of them.
mm.
I don't think the idea of having to, like, you know, play for a contract in a walk year is appealing. I don't think the idea of going somewhere new would be appealing. I just think he's a guy that you know wanted to be here because he knows he likes it here and doesn't see any reason to go somewhere else. Um, and I think he's just treated really well here. He has a really good relationship with Torey Lavello. The front office respects him and gives him a good amount of agency in a lot of the decisions that they make surrounding him. I just think that maybe he's someone that just kind of recognizes that I've got it pretty good here. Let's kind of not mess with a good thing.
You mentioned earlier Jordan Montgomery and the fact that maybe part of the idea behind this extension for the Diamondbacks was getting some of that immediate salary relief, maybe partially because they were expecting to offload some of Montgomery's money, and they ultimately did not do that. Obviously, the Diamondbacks did not know over the offseason what was going to happen. They did not know that Jordan Montgomery was going to ultimately need Tommy John surgery. But I still thought it was interesting, as far into spring training as we got with Jordan Montgomery still being a member of this team, it still felt like a trade was maybe going to happen, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe the Diamondbacks were actually serious about just holding on to him. What's your sense of kind of how that process unfolded? Where the Diamondbacks genuinely interested in a trade throughout the offseason, but they just kind of set the number too high, or how did that ultimately go?
I feel like I would mostly be guessing on this. Yeah, I do think that they probably put the number pretty high on how much they were expecting another team to take on. I don't know if that means that, like, a deal that most people think they should have taken ever really presented itself, or if he was always sort of a plan B, plan C, plan D for a lot of teams.
Hmm.
Um, I think that they uh, in my opinion, kind of reasonably expected that this guy was probably going to be better than he was, in 2024. And felt that when you look at some of the contracts that guys had signed, some of the, they call them pillow contracts that guys had signed on the free agent
Right.
market in the last couple of years, are for 12 million or 14 million or 16 million. Like, yeah, that's kind of what these established pitchers trying to bounce back, starting pitchers that have in the past, like I said, established, like shown what they can do, have been getting as free agents. And they kind of felt like, look, we shouldn't treat him any differently. Yeah, he's coming off a bad year, but you know, why would we expect this to happen again? It's probable that he's going to bounce back, and I think that's the way they viewed it. And I don't think the idea of um, paying 15 million for him to go off and pitch well somewhere else, which they genuinely believed he probably would do, was that appealing to them. Plus the fact
Mm.
that you're always in need of starting pitching, it seems like, as seasons go along. Like, the second you trade that sort of guy, you're probably going to have 2-3 injuries and be struggling to fill that spot. So um, I don't know. Long way of saying I'm not exactly sure how it played out. I assume that there had to have been some legitimate interest in him as things went along, and I mean, I know teams were scouting him pretty heavily there as spring training went along. But I just don't think teams were looking at him as a guy that they were willing to pay 12, $13 million to at this point in time. Um, in an alternate universe where maybe he goes out and makes 3-4 starts in the regular season and looks great, does that suddenly become more palatable? Maybe.
Mm.
But how many teams are out there that have that kind of money to spend in April? I don't know.
Right.
Maybe it was just sort of doomed from the start. And maybe the issue was that they gave him that contract, that they gave him that option, that they they were willing to go so heavy on a guy that they knew when they were signing him that last week of March last year had missed all of spring training. And maybe they just didn't properly recognize just how risky it was. And I would say, probably, I don't know about you, I don't quite remember exactly what you thought at the time. I've certainly thought they were getting a pretty good deal, that this was a
Yeah.
guy that we all thought was going to get, I don't know, 5 and 125 or something,
Right.
as last offseason was about to get started. I think getting Jordan Montgomery for what we all thought was going to be 1 and 25 and then he's gone, was a pretty good steal, and I think everyone would have taken it. It just didn't work out.
Who are they extending next, Nick? Is it Gabby Moreno? Is Gabby Moreno next week? Like, what do we got on the docket here?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I wrote something this spring that they tried to extend Gabby the previous spring. I don't know if they ended up doing, making a run at him again this year. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of the one that has always made the most sense. I was a little surprised by Fott. Um, I guess I hadn't really had Perdomo on my radar for no good reason, I guess. But uh, once they did that deal, I wasn't surprised. And then Martinez, obviously, I don't think was super surprising either. But yeah, I I don't know where they stand with Gabby. I feel like he's a tough one to value. Probably from his own perspective, he probably believes there's more in there offensively, and I wouldn't disagree. So I
Mm.
can understand if he gets offered a number and thinks he might be worth 75% more than that, coming, a year from now. So I can see why that one might be tricky to come up with a valuation. And plus, like, he's a good defensive catcher with a pretty high floor as a hitter. Um, I think he's. I mean, Austin Hedges is making $4 million this year.
Right.
Gabby Moreno is going to make a lot of money for a long time, whether that comes around or not. I know there's always injury risks and all that stuff. They're probably a little less as a position player, but I feel like that would be a tough one to really come to terms on if you're comfortable being patient as the player.
I guess the other name that maybe comes to mind is Jordan Lawlar, something that we've seen a number of teams do, like with guys that haven't even been in the majors yet or have spent a very small amount of time in the majors. Certainly those types of deals don't happen often. Is that something that you could conceivably imagine happening here at some point?
Um, yeah, I guess so. I hadn't thought too much about that, to be honest. I'm trying to think from his perspective. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I have any real insights to lend on that one, like whether that would make more sense for the player or the team. It is a guy that's run into a lot of injuries here early in his career. Maybe you could make the argument that he could see the value in some security and some
Sure.
certainty there. And obviously the team's perspective. They've believed in him and valued him highly, but I could see the argument that there's some risk there because of those health issues. Um, and I guess he hasn't performed to such a level that like he's an absolute slam dunk the way that kind of everyone felt with Corbin Carroll.
Right,
Um,
right.
so I don't know. The way Hazen has talked about these sorts of deals over the last few weeks is that when there is more risk involved from both sides, that's when these sorts of things end up getting done. Um, so, from that perspective, maybe it could get done with Jordan Lawlar.
Yeah, interesting to see. He's at least thinking of other names that could conceivably imagine something happening. He's at least one name that pops into my head. But yeah, it's inevitable, Nick. It's gonna, this is a weekly thing now with this franchise. So, you can basically lock it in the next week. You'll be writing about the next Diamondbacks extension. Uh,
Gives us something to write about. I'm all for it.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. A couple last things I wanted to hit. One of the storylines of this very young season, admittedly, we're talking such small samples here that it's hard to really put any stock into any numbers that we have to this point. But Shelby Miller has looked outstanding so far in pretty much every bullpen appearance he's had. I wasn't around much for spring training, but I know you were, and it sounds to me like his spring training was pretty impressive as well. What's kind of the story here? 'Cause Shelby has bounced around, has had some good moments the last couple years as a reliever, but what we've seen so far looks like an even better pitcher than we've really ever seen from him potentially in a bullpen role.
It's a great story, isn't it? Especially if he can keep it up and complete this sort of I don't know, just recovery arc, so to speak, from where he was, years ago with the Diamondbacks, and just kind of redefining himself and changing the way that everybody views him. I don't know exactly what's going on. I don't think it's an awful lot different from a stuff perspective in terms of the mix. It's still been mostly fastball split. He talked at the end of spring training about how he was enjoying throwing his old slider again. I think that was a pitch that maybe the Tigers didn't want him to throw in the same way um, last year. But I mean, he hasn't really thrown it. I'm looking at the data here. I mean, he's thrown one slider and four sweepers. I'm not sure what the difference is exactly on those pitches and how he would describe them coming out of his hand. But he's been great. You're right. He's been awesome. The talk around camp and around the Diamondbacks organization just since he's been back is just how different he seems as a person. Um, it's just a lot of time has passed. A lot of years have gone by. He's married. He has children. He's become a more mature individual. He, takes his diet, his workout regimen, just all the things that he needs to do to get prepared and be successful seriously in a way that maybe he didn't before. Not that he didn't work hard or didn't care about that stuff. it's just different when you're 26, 27, and you don't necessarily need to do all of those things to roll out of bed and throw 97. Um, so, people have described him as like almost unrecognizable, just from
Wow.
the guy that he was before.
Hmm.
And I mean, I see it. It's just a guy that he just seems more comfortable in his own skin. He just seems more uh, sure of what makes him successful. Like sometimes you just talk to guys about why they were good last year, why they weren't, and there's just like they're just you can just kind of tell they're making it up. You know what I mean? They don't really know. Like, but you talk to Shelby now, and he just seems to understand like what it is that he needs to do to be a good pitcher. So whether that lasts in a bullpen role, I don't know. I mean that stuff's still hard to predict, and it can go haywire in a few outings. So I will say though I have enjoyed watching it. I have always felt bad for him for just kind of the situation he was dropped into. Right? I mean,
Yeah.
they had gone out and signed Zac Greinke to a $200 million contract. Um, and it made that front office group feel like they absolutely had to add another arm to pair with Greinke. Otherwise, it just meant spending $200 million on Greinke was, you know, a luxury item or something, not like the sort of move that you really ought to make to if you're truly going for it. So they needed another legitimate rotation piece, and unfairly, I guess, looking back on it, to Shelby, like they decided that Shelby was that guy. Like he hadn't really done all that much to that point in his career to justify that certainly the price that they paid to get him. It created an almost an instantaneous backlash, and it created an immense amount of pressure on him to deliver. And he just couldn't. He just didn't, and then he got hurt. It was a vicious cycle. And you kind of wondered when he left here if we're going to see this guy in the big leagues much ever again.
Yeah.
And here he is, and all these years later, he's a totally different guy, and he's great. It's been really fun to watch, and I hope for his sake personally it continues. He's a good fellow, a nice guy, and fun to deal with.
Last topic here for you, Nick. We talked about Zac Gallen's 13 strikeout performance on the show the other day, but you were actually there. You were in New York. You got to see it with your own eyes and talk to him afterward. This is not to say that any of us are utterly shocked that Zac Gallen went out there and did this. He is a very, very, very talented pitcher and has certainly had outings like that before in the past. But the last year and a half, like maybe been a little bit less consistent than we're used to. And then all of a sudden, after a pretty rough outing on opening day, something clicked in New York, and we saw, in my view, basically the best version of Zac Gallen that we've ever seen. It was 24 whiffs, 13 strikeouts. He didn't walk anyone. It should have been 14 strikeouts, arguably. What was he saying after the game? What was his explanation for just this utter dominant version of himself that suddenly kind of returned to form?
Yeah, I mean, he was talking about different adjustments that he's been able to make. I mean, you've talked to Gallen enough to know that he's constantly tinkering with his delivery, and he thinks that there were various things that he'd done over the last year or so, including his arm angle dropping a little bit, that kind of led to some inconsistencies uh, in a number of ways. Like, first the fastball I think is the thing that stands out the most to me. I know the curveball was the dominant pitch the other night in terms of getting the strikeouts, but he seemed to command his fastball extremely well. He was
Yeah.
throwing with decent velocity, and he was getting, I think, pretty insane amounts of ride on it. You look at the IVB, the induced vertical break numbers. I think it averaged close to 18 or 19 inches, which is pretty impressive when you can throw 93, 94, 95 and locate it as well as he does, and of course pair it with the secondary stuff that he has. But the curveball has gotten better as well. I think that he has talked about just, some of these bad habits maybe that he got into from a delivery perspective left him struggling to really locate that pitch as effectively as he would like, and wound up, in his mind, in too many counts where, he winds up going 1-0, 2-0, and then has to kind of come back with a fastball. And then that pitch ends up kind of, uh, you know, leaking a little bit over the plate, more than he would like, and leading to a lot of damage. So we'll see. I mean, I think like the question is always, if he can bottle it up, if he can ride it. I think probably what's most encouraging historically for a D-backs fan and for Gallen is that when he is at his absolute best, it often isn't just for one start. It tends to
Right.
be long stretches where you can go a month or a month and a half and he gives up 3 runs. So we'll see if that is in fact the case. He still doesn't seem to think that he's fully there. It doesn't.
He
Talking to
never
him the day
does, right?
after, yeah, yeah, you're right. I mean, it's constantly tweaking. But like talking to him the day after, he still felt like it just didn't. It didn't feel like uh, supernatural. It felt like he was still kind of trying to search a little bit for some things. That was my takeaway from a conversation I had with him. Um, but he thinks he's getting closer, and he's very excited about where he is, and he had a lot of good things to say about the work that he's been putting in with Brian Kaplan, the new pitching coach, and some of the suggestions. And I think it's just that he and Kaplan seem to uh, think about the delivery in similar ways, and can
Hmm.
kind of um, can kind of conceptualize certain changes, and recognize when they're going down the wrong path, and kind of get back on track pretty quickly. So yeah, it was quite a turnaround. You're right, from start one to start two. But I feel like we've seen that with Gallen over the years,
Yes.
where one day he's throwing 90, 91, and then kind of all of a sudden it's fives and sixes in the first inning of the next start, like just sort of almost out of nowhere. It it's interesting, just what the just how hard it can be to maintain that delivery. It's like, I guess it's like a golf swing. Like you think like, um, well, why can't he just perfect his delivery? He's been doing this, since he was how old? Like, why can't he just, but the reality is like your muscles are constantly changing. Your body is feeling different things. You go in the trainer's room and you try to get something worked on, and it moves this thing around this way, and it winds up changing the way that you feel. And it's just these imperceptible movements, or muscle movements that affect your delivery in ways like that. I mean, like I said, it's like a golf swing. Like you're those guys are constantly tweaking their swings, and you would think in that sport too, like, well, why can't they just swing the same way every single time? It's just not that easy.
Are you a golfer, Nick?
I'm not. Are you?
Okay. No, no, I'm terrible at golf. So unfortunately, neither of us can actually relate to that analogy, but it does make sense. Uh,
I've tried to golf. I mean, I'm really, I just don't have the patience for it. So I can relate to it. It's just, it's too difficult. It's too frustrating for me. So I do other things with my time.
Yeah, I don't have like a golf. There is no golf swing to try to maintain. For me personally, it's just a matter of trying to find some semblance of a reasonably good golf swing in the first place. I don't think I'll ever get there. Uh, well, hey Nick, we really appreciate your time. For those who somehow do not subscribe to the Arizona Republic to read anything and everything that Nick writes about the Arizona Diamondbacks, I really cannot recommend it enough. He alone is worth worth the price of a subscription over there. So be sure to do that if you have not already. Just outstanding coverage over the course of the year. Nick, hopefully we'll have you on again soon. This was a lot of fun. And thanks again for doing it. We also appreciate the bird noises from your backyard. It really improves the ambiance of the show. So
Well, sure. Anytime, Jesse. Happy to be on. And yeah, thanks for the kind words. Appreciate any subscribers. Anybody reading our stuff, it's great.
Thanks again for joining us on episode 3 of Snakes Territory. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to Snakes Territory on YouTube. Also, drop a like and a comment on this video. Not only does it help the algorithm, but we also love to hear from you and interact with you in the comments. I've really appreciated all of the very positive feedback that we've gotten on the show so far. Also, if you are a big supporter of what we're doing, we'd really appreciate it if you would consider rating and reviewing the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. That really goes a long way for us here as we look to get the show up and running. You can follow Nick Piecoro on Twitter at Nick Piecoro. That's Piecoro. You can follow me at Jesse N. Friedman. Our show is at Snakes Territory. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll be back again right here on Snakes Territory very, very soon.